The flip was always real. XRP was never just a theory. Everyone mocked XRP holders when they said, "The switch is going to flip." It became a running joke in the crypto space. Meme lords turned it into copium. YouTubers laughed it off as delusion. But now, here in 2025, it's crystal clear. The switch wasn't a fantasy. It was a framework. It was never about some magical overnight pump. The flip was about infrastructure quietly being laid brick by brick while the rest of crypto chased hype cycles, dog coins, and Ethereum gas wars. Ripple never played the hype game. They played the institutional long game, and they're winning. Let's be real. While influencers were pumping altcoins for likes, Ripple was sitting in meetings with central banks. While traders watched candles, Ripple was building corridors across Asia, Africa, LATAM, and the Middle East. While the market panicked over bear cycles, Ripple onboarded over 300 financial institutions, from Santander to SBI to the National Bank of Egypt. The switch? It was never a single day. It was a system being booted up in phases. Regulatory clarity? Achieved. XRP is the first digital asset with legal status in the US. Liquidity corridors? Live. Over 70 countries activated with on-demand liquidity, ODL. CBDC pilots? Already in motion in Bhutan, Palau, Montenegro, and more coming. Tokenized assets? In development with banking giants and institutional players. And here's the twist most people missed. XRP isn't the beneficiary of this system. It is the system. RippleNet doesn't run without XRP. ODL doesn't move without XRP. These corridors don't function without a bridge asset that's lightning fast, dirt cheap, and regulatory cleared. That's the design. That's why Ripple never had to hype anything. The code was already running. So when people say the switch flipped, they're finally catching up. The network is going live. The banks are connected. The liquidity is routing. And the funny thing? Retail investors are the last to know because institutions don't tweet. Subscribe to Be Crypto Smart right now, because this next chapter won't be about speculation. As the flip was always real, XRP was never just a theory. They mocked. They memed. They said, "The switch will flip," and the world laughed. For over a decade, XRP holders have been ridiculed for believing something was happening behind the scenes. Something far bigger than just a price chart or a bull run. The switch is about to flip became one of the most misunderstood phrases in crypto history. But now, in 2025, here's the brutal truth. The flip wasn't a meme. It wasn't delusion. It was real, and it's happening. You were never supposed to see it coming, because it wasn't meant for retail. It was built for the rails beneath global finance. For the back end. The systems that don't care about hype, just speed, efficiency, and regulatory compliance. Ripple didn't spend the last 10 years trying to moon a chart. They spent it rewriting the plumbing of international finance. While the market obsessed over Bitcoin ETFs and memecoins, Ripple was sitting down with central banks in Asia and Latin America, financial regulators in the EU, UK, and UAE, institutions like Bank of America, Santander, SBI Holdings, and over 300+ banks that now quietly sit on RippleNet. This wasn't a pivot. This was the plan. The switch was never meant to flip in public. It was coded into the system. XRP was never the product. It's the protocol. Let's be real. XRP isn't just a token. It's the liquidity layer for a new financial system. ODL, on-demand liquidity, doesn't run without it. RippleNet corridors don't function without it. CBDC pilots across Bhutan, Palau, Montenegro, and others, all tested with XRP acting as the instant bridge between currencies. And here's where it gets even more explosive. Ripple wasn't just building rails. They were embedding themselves inside the core operations of global value transfer. In 2020, XRP was considered a speculative asset. In 2025, it's an enterprise-grade liquidity mechanism live in over 70 countries. In 2026, it may be the default standard for instant cross-border value movement, without retail even realizing it happened. Because this isn't about price pumps. It's about replacing a system that's been broken since the 1970s. SWIFT, Nostro accounts, multi-day settlement, 5% plus hidden FX fees. Ripple looked at that and said, "We can build better." And they did. The flip was a framework, now it's activating. This isn't about a single light switch flipping on. It's about the activation of a new system piece by piece. Let's break down what's live right now. Live corridors using XRP for FX settlements, including the Philippines, Mexico, Brazil, Singapore, UAE, and Colombia. CBDC trials using Ripple's ledger and XRP integration. Central banks are literally building on the tech. Liquidity demand growing quietly. ODL volume has exploded past $30 billion plus in cumulative transactions, with no signs of slowing. And here's the kicker. Every time an institution uses XRP to bridge a payment, it creates real buy pressure on the asset. But unlike speculation-driven hype, that demand doesn't vanish. It compounds. While everyone's watching price charts, Ripple has positioned XRP to be the silent core of a multi-trillion-dollar machine that doesn't stop. If you're still doubting XRP, you're not seeing the system. The retail crowd waits for pumps. Institutions build infrastructure. Ripple has already won the battle that most people haven't realized is happening. The tech is live. The corridors are open. The institutions are already plugged in. And the switch? It didn't flip in a headline. It flipped quietly, when Ripple connected the world's payment networks to a system that finally works in real time. XRP is no longer a theory. It's no longer a what if. It's the protocol quietly absorbing global liquidity, transaction by transaction, while retail sleeps. Subscribe to Be Crypto Smart right now because the rest of the market is still watching TikToks about meme coins, while XRP is swallowing entire financial corridors one integration at a time. About integration. And XRP is already embedded in the pipes. RippleNet is replacing SWIFT in silence. While the market chases headlines about Bitcoin ETFs and Ethereum's endless Layer 2 patchwork, something far more disruptive is happening quietly. And it's happening where 99% of retail isn't even looking. It's not in the price charts. It's not on social media. It's happening deep inside the infrastructure of global finance, the rails that move trillions behind the scenes. And that's where Ripple is winning. SWIFT isn't being competed with, it's being replaced. For decades, SWIFT has been the global standard for cross-border messaging and settlement. But it was never designed for real-time finance. It's slow, expensive, and outdated, built in a pre-internet era that still relies on manual reconciliation and pre-funded Nostro accounts. Now, RippleNet is stepping in as the upgrade. And it's not a theory. Banks, payment providers, and even central banks are now routing real-world transactions through RippleNet, using XRP as the settlement layer in corridors where SWIFT simply can't deliver. In Brazil, Ripple's ODL is powering same-day FX settlements between USD and BRL. In the UAE, Ripple partners are using XRP to facilitate cross-border payments from South Asia to the Gulf. In Singapore, a regional hub for fintech, RippleNet is already handling transactions between banks with instant liquidity and zero pre-funding. This isn't a testbed. This is a full-blown operational replacement for SWIFT, happening in emerging markets where efficiency is more than convenience. It's survival. RippleNet isn't a competitor. It's a parallel system, and it's already live. RippleNet was never designed to compete with crypto projects chasing TVL or hype cycles. It was engineered to become the financial internet, a globally connected messaging and liquidity network that doesn't just match the speed of modern capital flows, it unlocks them. And XRP? That's the liquidity engine powering it. Institutions don't want to hold volatile assets. They don't want 5-day settlement. They want compliance, finality, and 24/7 execution. Ripple's ODL, on-demand liquidity, gives them exactly that. No pre-funded accounts. No correspondent bank delays. Just-in-time liquidity using XRP as the bridge. Banks that once needed to hold millions in dormant capital across multiple currencies are now eliminating that waste and replacing it with XRP-based flow. That's not a technical improvement. That's a fundamental restructuring of how global money moves. And it's not just payments. It's the new liquidity layer. What Ripple is building goes beyond payment messaging. It's a liquidity layer for the Internet of Value. The end goal? Replace SWIFT for messaging. Replace Nostro Vostro with XRP-powered liquidity. Replace legacy rails with real-time corridors that connect not just banks, but stablecoins, CBDCs, and tokenized assets. And the markets they're dominating aren't fringe. RippleNet is active in Asia-Pacific, South America, Africa, and the Middle East, where most of the $1 trillion plus annual remittance flow takes place. And here's the real kicker. Every corridor that activates through ODL quietly pulls liquidity volume through XRP. Every transaction absorbs real XRP demand. And every expansion creates network effects that Swift simply cannot compete with. Ripple isn't trying to win the crypto narrative. They're replacing legacy systems without asking for permission. While Ethereum fights congestion and Bitcoin waits for miners to update firmware, Ripple is onboarding entire banking systems to corridors that run on XRP. Not as a speculation tool, but as a native liquidity asset. The back end of finance is quietly flipping to RippleNet. Retail isn't supposed to see it, but the signs are everywhere. Former Swift executives now work at Ripple. Central banks are openly collaborating on CBDC pilots using Ripple's infrastructure. And top-tier banks, the kind that would never hold Doge, are using XRP to solve multi-billion-dollar liquidity problems. This isn't about price predictions. This is about flow. And the money is already flowing through RippleNet. So while crypto Twitter debates ETFs and DeFi fights for scraps, XRP is becoming the default standard in corridors that do hundreds of billions annually, and most people won't realize it until the legacy system is fully unplugged. Subscribe to Be Crypto Smart right now because Ripple is already operating in the next financial era. While the rest of the market still thinks this is about coins, the global liquidity trapdoor has opened. While the crypto market was distracted by memecoins and ETF narratives, something far more serious happened in the background. The liquidity trapdoor opened, and XRP was positioned right underneath it. In 2024, Ripple's on-demand liquidity, ODL, processed over $30 billion in cumulative volume. Not testnet traffic. Not speculative wash trading. We're talking about real-world remittances, foreign exchange flows, institutional settlements, flowing through XRP. And that $30 billion is just the warm-up phase. Because now in 2025, RippleNet has activated in over 70 markets, and more corridors are coming online every quarter. This isn't about token price anymore. It's about XRP's role in the plumbing of global finance. Every transaction is a buy and a burn. Here's what most people still don't understand. Every time XRP is used to bridge fiat currencies, say USD to MXN or Euro to PHP, it must be bought on the open market to initiate the transaction. That creates natural programmatic by pressure that doesn't care about FUD, charts, or emotions. But it doesn't stop there. Once the transaction is settled and the corridor completes, that XRP doesn't just cycle back. It's burned from circulating liquidity, effectively reducing supply while global demand scales up. This means XRP isn't just a bridge, it's a self-regulating liquidity sink that tightens its own supply as usage increases. That's not speculation. That's math. XRP, the institutional liquidity layer of the next financial era. You need to forget the crypto project mindset when looking at XRP. Ripple isn't building a hype coin. They're deploying enterprise-grade liquidity infrastructure that's now being embedded into remittance platforms in LATAM and Southeast Asia, bank-to-bank corridors in the Middle East and Europe, CBDC settlement layers in APAC, tokenized real estate and asset clearing systems in the UAE and Hong Kong. And at the center of it all, XRP, as the on-chain liquidity rail that unifies fragmented fiat and tokenized economies. We're entering a new phase, one where XRP isn't priced by retail speculation. It's being valued by utility, scarcity, and velocity within trillion-dollar markets. You can't print liquidity, you have to route it. The legacy financial system is hitting a wall. Trillions in dormant capital are locked up in Nostro accounts just to support cross-border friction. Central banks are desperate for programmable infrastructure that supports interoperability, compliance, and finality in real time. Ripple solved that. Instead of requiring banks to pre-fund international accounts, Ripple's ODL uses XRP to route liquidity just in time. No idle capital. No delays. No counterparties. Just settlement in seconds at pennies per transaction. That's why banks are quietly ditching Swift's outdated system and plugging into RippleNet corridors that run on XRP. And as more value routes through XRP, demand doesn't scale linearly, it scales exponentially. Because liquidity begets liquidity. And XRP was engineered to absorb global volume without breaking. 500+ transactions per second. Sub-second finality. Low volatility bridging with tight spreads. Neutral, decentralized layer. It's not a coin anymore. It's financial gravity. Institutional XRP demand is about to go parabolic. Here's what most retail still can't see. We're now watching the tokenization wave arrive in full force. $20 trillion in real estate. $5 trillion in bonds and treasuries. $1 trillion plus in stablecoins and CBDC pilots. And what do all those assets need? Interoperable liquidity. Not hype. Not yield farming. Not DAOs. They need a neutral bridge asset that can move between chains, across borders, and between asset classes in real time. That's the trapdoor. That's the global liquidity flood. And XRP is sitting at the bottom by design, ready to swallow it all. Every corridor that switches to ODL reroutes billions through XRP. Every stablecoin that connects to RippleNet inherits XRP liquidity rails. Every CBDC pilot running on Ripple Tech pings XRP behind the scenes. This is no longer about if. It's about how quickly the rest of the financial world realizes what's already live. And by the time retail wakes up, the supply will already be under pressure from institutions buying XRP for function, not speculation. Subscribe to Be Crypto Smart now because while everyone's watching ETF candles, XRP is being programmed into the backbone of a multi-trillion-dollar liquidity reset. 2025 is full activation mode. Ripple isn't in build mode anymore. It's in deployment mode. And in 2025, everything that's been quietly assembled over the past decade is going live. Let's break it down. The SEC case is over. XRP is one of the only digital assets with regulatory clarity in the US, while Ethereum is still under investigation. That gives Ripple a first-mover advantage with institutions who've been sitting on the sidelines. Ripple stablecoin launches this year, backed 1:1 by US dollars, and it plugs directly into RippleNet. That means more on-ramps, more off-ramps, and more liquidity injected straight into XRP corridors. RippleNet corridors are live in Brazil, Colombia, the Philippines, and across Southeast Asia. These aren't tests. These are payment highways moving real money, backed by banks, remittance giants, and governments. Partnerships are surfacing. Rumors of tokenized asset settlement pilots with BlackRock, HSBC, and even Saudi Arabia's central bank aren't just hype. They signal a shift in global finance toward programmable liquidity. And XRP is at the center. Leadership has leveled up. Ripple has brought in former execs from Amazon, MasterCard, the US Treasury, and BlackRock to scale institutional growth. These aren't crypto influencers. They're the same people who built the infrastructure of the existing system. Now they're building its replacement. And XRP is the bridge. This isn't a roadmap anymore. It's execution. Ripple is onboarding the real economy. Not speculation, not promises, but plugged-in infrastructure that settles billions in value. 2025 isn't hype season. It's activation season. And the institutions know it. XRP was designed for this moment. All of this is possible because XRP was never a meme coin. It was engineered for one thing: seamless, instant, cross-border value transfer at scale. 1,500 transactions per second. Sub-penny fees. Built-in compliance tools. Low energy usage. XRP checks all the boxes that regulators and institutions require. And now it's being activated not by hype, but by need. Every new corridor, every new partner, every new stablecoin or CBDC pilot adds volume to the XRP ledger. And with a fixed supply, growing utility only has one outcome. The liquidity flip isn't coming. It's here. And those who dismissed XRP will realize too late, it was never about speculation. It was about infrastructure. Subscribe to Be Crypto Smart and don't miss the coming wave. Because the quietest projects always make the loudest impact after they go live.